If this story made you think, or made you feel something, please don't forget to leave a like, share it with someone you believe it will resonate with, and subscribe to Dipu Cater Stories so you never miss the next mystery we uncover together. I'll see you in the next story, and who knows, maybe next time. The story will be about you, Bashar. What is the greatest fear of old age, sickness, loneliness, or is it the moment you realize you're being hunted, not by a monster, but by the cold indifference of your own flesh and blood? Her son's house wasn't a home, it was a trap. Every meal was a test. Every word was a knife's edge. She wasn't a mother anymore. She was prey, cornered in a silent hunt. But even the weakest prey, when left with no escape, will eventually show its fangs. Will this battle for survival end with the victim's collapse or the hunter's downfall? The Biscuit and the Silence. My name is Hattie Mae Thompson. I am 75 years old. For most of my life, I believed that if you raised your children right, gave them everything you had, your last years would be a time of peace, a quiet front porch swing. But then came the day I learned a hard truth. Some things, no matter how freely you give them, are never given back. This morning, that truth was served to me for breakfast. The kitchen in my son's Atlanta home is a vast, cold space. The countertops are made of a speckled granite that feels like a tombstone under my fingertips. The refrigerator is twice as wide as I am and hums a low, wealthy sound. Everything is shiny and silent. A heavy, polished kind of silence that swallows up small sounds, like the clink of a fork or the sigh of an old woman. I had finished the small portion of scrambled eggs on my plate and was still hungry. The warming basket in the center of the granite island was filled with fluffy, buttermilk biscuits, their golden tops glistening under the recessed lighting. The steam from them promised a little bit of warmth. I reached out and took one. It was a small thing, no bigger than the palm of my hand. I was about to break it open when my son, Junior, spoke. He didn't look up from his phone, where his thumb was swiping through an endless river of words and pictures. "Mom," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was calm, practical. The tone you might use to correct a small error on a spreadsheet. Maybe just one biscuit for today. We're trying to watch the budget. Things are expensive right now. Expensive. The word hung in the air between us, clean and sharp as broken glass. I looked across the vast stone island to his wife, Brenda. She was stirring a tiny silver spoon in a porcelain teacup, her eyes fixed on the little whirlpool she was making. She didn't look at me, but I saw it. Her chin gave a small, tight nod. A quiet agreement. A signature on the bill. My hand, the one holding the biscuit, stayed frozen in midair. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The humming of the refrigerator faded. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. This was my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had cleaned, the boy whose fevers I had cooled with a damp cloth through long nights, the boy for whom I had worked double shifts at the hospital, my feet aching, just so he could have the best shoes, the best books, the best chance. I had poured my life into him, like pouring water into a thirsty field, and now, in this palace built on a foundation I could no longer see, I was being told that I was too expensive to feed. That was the moment the silence broke. Not my silence. I remained perfectly still, but a silence inside me, a dam of patience and hope that had been cracking for 6 long months, finally gave way. I looked down at the biscuit in my hand. Then I looked at Junior, who was still absorbed in his phone, oblivious. I looked at Brenda, who was now carefully dabbing the corners of her mouth with a cloth napkin. They were a portrait of serene, domestic comfort. And I was the smudge on the glass, the unwanted expense, the servant who had forgotten her place. I did not put the biscuit back. Slowly, deliberately, I placed it on my plate. I picked up my knife, spread it with a sliver of butter, and took a bite. It was a small act, a quiet rebellion, but it felt as monumental as signing a declaration of war. Brenda's teacup clattered into its saucer. Junior finally looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with a kind of shocked disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the woman sitting across from him was not just his aging mother. She was a stranger he had created, and he did not know what she was capable of. I finished the biscuit, chewing each mouthful slowly. The taste was ash in my mouth. When I was done, I folded my hands in my lap. The war had begun. The silence that followed was different. It was not heavy. It was thin and sharp, brittle. The air crackled with it. My gaze drifted down to the table, to the polished wood with its swirling grain. I stared at the patterns, and they began to blur, pulling me back, not to escape the present, but to understand how I had arrived here. The polished surface dissolved, and the cold stone of the kitchen faded. In its place, I felt the warm, splintery wood of my own front porch. 6 months ago, that was the day the first stone was laid for this prison of politeness. The day my son came back, not as a son, but as a salesman. He came with a smile on his face and a contract hidden in his heart. And I, with a mother's foolish hope, had opened the door and let him in. The porch swing and the promise. My son's voice was smooth as creek water running over mossy stones. He spoke of my comfort, my safety. He painted a picture of my golden years spent in a sunlit room, with grandchildren bringing me glasses of sweet tea. A life with no worries. A life where everything was taken care of. It was a beautiful picture, the kind you see on the cover of a church pamphlet. I just listened. I let his words wash over me, feeling for the cold currents underneath. He pulled a thick sheaf of papers from a leather briefcase that was sitting by his feet. The papers were crisp and white. They smelled important. "It's all right here, Mom," he said, tapping a manicured finger on the top page. "It's a simple living trust. It just puts me in charge of managing the property, paying the taxes, that sort of thing. So you don't have to keep track of it all. Just a way to simplify." Simplify. That was the word he used. It sounded so clean, so helpful. I took the papers from him. The weight of them felt heavier than it should. My old reading glasses were in my apron pocket. I put them on and looked at the first page. The words were small, dense, a forest of legal language. Hereinafter, whereas, party of the first part. Words meant to get you lost. I looked up, over the top of my glasses. I kept my voice light. Just a simple question from a simple old woman. "So, this is a trust, not a mortgage, right?" "Junior," I asked. "Your daddy always explained the difference to me. He said, a trust is like putting your treasures in a safe box for keeping. But a mortgage is like handing the key to someone else." For just a second, a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Annoyance, surprise, it was gone as quickly as it came. He laughed. A short, sharp sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom, don't you worry your head about all that legal stuff," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "That's why I'm here. To handle it for you. It's a trust. Of course it's a trust. I'm your son." He said that last part like it was the answer to every question I could possibly have. I'm your son. As if those 3 words were a sacred guarantee. A holy seal that made all the fine print disappear. He didn't explain the difference. He just reminded me of who he was. I didn't push. I just nodded slowly, folding the papers and holding them in my lap. "Let your old mother think on it overnight," I said. "It's a big change." He wanted to argue. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw. The hurry was still there. But he couldn't. It wouldn't fit the picture of the loving, patient son. So he just smiled that tight smile again and said, "Of course. Take all the time I need." That evening, after he'd gone to stay at a fancy hotel in town, the house felt different. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It felt watchful. I made myself a small supper of black-eyed peas and cornbread, but I couldn't taste much of it. The papers sat on the kitchen table, looking like a snake coiled up in the lamplight. After I washed the dishes, I picked up the phone. I didn't call my neighbor, and I didn't call my friend Evelyn. I called my cousin's daughter, Loretta. She lives up in Macon, working as a paralegal, a smart girl. We don't talk often, but she always sends a Christmas card. Loretta, Honey, how are you doing? I started. Just as sweet as pie. We talked about her kids, about the church bake sale, about the heat. Just two family members catching up. Then, when the conversation felt warm and easy, I steered it ever so gently. You know, I said, letting out a little sigh. These days, things get so complicated for an old woman. Junior was just down here talking about trusts and deeds and all sorts of things. It goes right over my head. Tell me, honey, is there much difference between putting a house in a trust and, say, using it as collateral for a loan? I said it just like that. Simple. Like I was asking about a recipe. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A small, careful pause. A world of difference. Aunt Hattie, Loretta said, her voice suddenly losing its casual tone. One is about protecting an asset. The other is about risking it. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, I said quickly. Just an old woman trying to understand this modern world. We said our goodbyes. I hung up the phone and stood there in the quiet kitchen. The house was dark except for the single light over the sink. A world of difference. That's what she'd said. And Junior had tried to tell me they were the same. I walked back to the table and looked at the papers. I saw the word he had pointed to, trust. But as I scanned the pages, my old eyes searching through that forest of words, I saw other words, too. Lien. Default. Foreclosure. Words that Samuel had taught me were poison. Right then, I knew what this was, but I also knew that if I said no, he would just find another way. A smoother lawyer. A more confusing set of papers. He would come back with a different story, a different promise. And he would keep coming back until he got what he wanted. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the smooth, cool paper. I thought about my garden, about the memory of my husband in every corner of this house. And I realized something. You can't fight a snake by yelling at it from a distance. It'll just hide in the grass and wait for another chance to strike. Sometimes you have to let it into the house, where you can watch it, where you can see exactly how it moves. I decided then and there, I would go with him. I would sign the papers, not because I believed his lies, but because I needed to see the truth. I needed to know the full depth of the hole he was digging, because that was the only way I would ever know how to climb back out. The basement room and the ledger. The drive to Atlanta was a blur of gray highways and green signs with names of towns I didn't know. Junior talked the whole way. He talked about the market, about investments, about a new golf club he was joining. He didn't ask me once about the home I was leaving behind. It was as if he were driving away from a business meeting, not from the place where he took his first steps. We arrived at his house late in the afternoon. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. A tall brick place with a lawn so green it looked like it had been painted on. Brenda opened the door before we even reached it. She was wearing a crisp white dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome home, Hattie," she said. Her voice was thin, like fine china. Pretty, but easily chipped. They gave me a tour. The living room had a ceiling so high it could have held its own clouds. The kitchen, as I would soon learn, was a place of cold stone and stainless steel. Everything gleamed. Everything was in its place. It was the kind of clean that feels unwelcoming. The kind of clean that makes you afraid to touch anything. Then Junior led me toward a narrow staircase tucked away behind the laundry room. "We thought you'd like your own private space." "Mom," he said, "nice and quiet down here." The beautiful room with the garden view he had promised me on the porch swing turned out to be in the basement. The air grew cooler as we descended. The smell changed. It wasn't the smell of polish and potpourri anymore. It was the smell of damp concrete and laundry detergent and something else. Something lonely. The room was neat. I'll give them that. A narrow bed was made up with a thin, plain comforter. There was a small dresser and a single chair. On the far wall, a tiny window sat high up, almost touching the ceiling. It looked out onto the bottom of a manicured bush and a slice of gray foundation. That was my garden view. To the right of my bed, A large washing machine and dryer stood like two silent, white soldiers. The laundry room is right here, so it's convenient, Brenda said, as if that were a selling point. You'll have your own bathroom, too. I just nodded. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything at all. I sat my old canvas bag on the bed. It looked small and out of place in that sterile room. The next morning, I found a piece of paper taped to the refrigerator upstairs. It was a computer printout, neat and tidy, with a cheerful, curly font at the top. It read, Grandma Hattie's Daily Contribution. It was a schedule. 6:30 in the morning, start breakfast eggs, bacon, toast. 7:30 in the morning, pack lunches for Junior and Brenda. 8 o'clock in the morning, tidy the kitchen. 9 o'clock in the morning, start the first load of laundry. 12 o'clock noon, prepare a light lunch salad or soup, and so on. The day was mapped out for me, hour by hour. It was a list of chores disguised as a contribution, a job description hidden in the language of family. I took the paper off the refrigerator, folded it neatly, and put it in my apron pocket. Then I started breakfast. That first week, I was just an observer. I watched how they lived. I saw the way Brenda would run a finger over a countertop after I had just wiped it. I saw the way Junior would leave his plate on the table, expecting me to clear it, just like he did when he was 10 years old. I saw that I was not a guest. I was not a mother being cared for. I was staff, unpaid staff. On the 8th day, after they had gone to bed, I unpacked the rest of my things. From the very bottom of my canvas bag, I took out a thick, cloth-bound book. It was an old accounting ledger, the kind Samuel used to use for his little repair business. It had a clean, sturdy feel. The pages were lined with neat blue and red columns. On the first page, years ago, I had written in my best cursive Samuel's book of memories. I had meant to fill it with stories of our life together. I never did. Now, it would serve a new purpose. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed. The only light was from a small lamp on the dresser. The washing machine beside me gave a low hum. I opened the ledger to a fresh page. With a steady hand, I drew 4 columns. At the top of each, I wrote date divided by time. Event. Words spoken. Junior's response. Then I began to write. I didn't write about my feelings. I didn't write about the ache in my heart. I wrote facts. I wrote data. I was a nurse again, charting the symptoms of a sickness. My first entry was simple. October 15th, 7:00 p.m. vertical bar. Brenda commented on the amount of butter I used for the cornbread. Vertical bar, that's enough. Mom, we're watching our cholesterol. Vertical bar, Junior said nothing. Changed the subject to golf. I wrote down everything. The time Brenda reminded me that her silk blouses had to be hand-washed. The evening Junior asked if I could please iron his shirts for the week. The afternoon the cleaning lady came and Brenda introduced me as Junior's mother, who's helping us out for a while. Each entry was a small thing. A pinprick. But I knew that enough pinpricks could drain a person dry. I was not going to let them drain me. I was going to count every single one. I was going to document the slow, quiet theft of my dignity. This ledger was no longer a book of memories. It was a book of reckoning. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my age meant I had forgotten how to fight. Have you ever had to turn your pain into a weapon? Just to survive? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'm listening. The doctor's appointment and the locked door. The damp chill of the basement had seeped into my bones over the weeks. It wasn't the dull ache I was used to, the kind that came with the morning mist back home in Georgia. This was a sharper pain. A grinding, insistent pain in my right knee that felt like chewing on tinfoil. It made climbing the stairs to the kitchen feel like scaling a mountain. Each step, a negotiation with a hot poker. One Tuesday morning, the pain was so bad I had to sit on the edge of my cot for a full 10 minutes, just breathing, before I could stand. I knew this pain. As a nurse, I'd seen it in the faces of 100 older patients. It was the kind of pain that needed more than just a warm compress. It needed a doctor. I waited until Brenda was at the kitchen island, tapping away at her laptop. Her face was illuminated by the screen's cold, blue light. I approached her slowly, trying not to limp. Brenda, I said, my voice quiet. The arthritis in my knee is acting up something fierce. I think I need to see a doctor. Get a prescription. She didn't look up. Her fingers kept flying across the keyboard. There's Tylenol in the guest bathroom. Hattie. This is more than Tylenol can fix. Honey. It's been getting worse. I'm worried it might be something serious. She finally stopped typing and let out a long, impatient sigh. She turned to me, and her eyes were flat, annoyed. As if I were a leaky faucet she didn't have time to fix. It's just arthritis. Hattie. It comes with age, she said. Her voice clipped and final. Take some Tylenol. I have a Zoom call in 10 minutes, and Junior is in back-to-back meetings all day. We're incredibly busy. And that was it. My pain was an inconvenience. My health was an item on a to-do list that she had no intention of checking off. She turned back to her laptop, dismissing me completely. I stood there for a moment, the grinding in my knee echoing the grinding in my soul. Hope, even the thinnest sliver of it, had just been extinguished. I was on my own. I retreated to my basement room. I waited until I heard the faint sound of Brenda's voice from her home office upstairs, the smooth, professional tone she used for her business calls. Then, I pulled out the old flip phone I kept hidden in a shoebox under my cot. It was a relic, but it held a charge, and it wasn't connected to their family plan. It was my own. My fingers, stiff with pain, fumbled with the small buttons. I found the number for a local taxi service I'd written down weeks ago, just in case. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like a betrayal, a conspiracy. But a conspiracy against what? My own imprisonment. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I cupped my hand over the phone, whispering my address, asking for a cab to take me to the nearest urgent care clinic. They said one would be there in 15 minutes. Minutes, without the minutes, basis Nasky. It felt like a lifetime. I put on my coat and my most comfortable shoes. I took my purse, which held my Medicare card and the little bit of cash I had left. I decided to use the back door, the one that led out from the laundry room, to avoid walking past Brenda's office. I made my way up the basement stairs, one painful step at a time. The house was quiet except for the muffled sound of Brenda's voice. I slipped into the laundry room. The back door was right there. Freedom was on the other side. Sunlight. A doctor who might listen. I reached for the doorknob. It was a cold, brass knob. I turned it, nothing happened. I turned it again, harder this time. The knob turned, but the bolt didn't retract. It was locked. Not with the simple turn lock on the knob itself, but with a deadbolt. The kind you needed a key to open from the inside. A cold dread washed over me, colder than the basement floor. I pressed my face against the small window in the door. I could see the driveway, the perfectly manicured lawn. I could see the street. I was looking at the world, but I couldn't get to it. My eyes scanned the doorframe. And then I saw it. The small, silver box of the doorbell next to the door. Its wires had been disconnected, neatly snipped. It wasn't an oversight. It was a decision, a deliberate act. They hadn't just neglected me. They had contained me. I wasn't a guest in their home anymore. I wasn't even a servant. I was a prisoner. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The pain in my knee was gone, replaced by a vast, empty, terrifying numbness. That night, back in my room, the numbness gave way to a cold, hard clarity, the kind that comes after a high fever breaks. I took out Samuel's old ledger. I recorded the date, the conversation with Brenda, the locked door, the snipped wires. I wrote it all down in my neat, steady hand, but I didn't stop there. On a fresh page, I began to draw. My hand, the hand of a nurse who knew her way around charts and diagrams, sketched a small, crude map of the house. I marked Brenda's office, Junior's study, the hours they were usually occupied. I marked the front door, the back door, and then I drew a small arrow pointing to the garage. The one place I hadn't thought to check, the one place that might be my only way out. Beneath the map, I wrote 2 words, just 2. They weren't a plea, they weren't a prayer. They were a promise to myself. Plan B. The church, friend, and the escape. My plan B had only one name: Evelyn. Evelyn and I have been friends since we were girls with skin knees and ribbons in our hair. We've seen each other through first loves, through raising children, through burying husbands. We know the rhythm of each other's silences. I knew if I could just get a message to her, she would understand what wasn't being said. The chance came 2 days after the locked door. Brenda announced she was having a charity luncheon at the house. She was stressed, flitting around the kitchen like a trapped bird, and she needed me out of the way. "Hattie, why don't you call one of your friends from church?" she said, not looking at me. "You can have your weekly chat now. I'll need the phone back in 15 minutes. She placed the cordless phone on the kitchen counter, right next to where I was peeling potatoes. Then she pressed the speaker button. A little red light came on. She wanted to listen. Of course she did. My heart started a low, heavy drumming against my ribs. I wiped my hands on my apron and punched in Evelyn's number from memory. My fingers were surprisingly steady. "Evelyn's kitchen," her warm voice answered, just like it always did. "Evelyn." "It's Hattie," I said, keeping my own voice light and airy. "We talked about the weather. We talked about Reverend Johnson's sermon last Sunday." I could feel Brenda's presence behind me, a cold spot in the warm kitchen. I had to be careful. I was just sitting here thinking about old times. I said, my voice filled with a fake, wistful sigh. "Evelyn, do you remember that pecan pie recipe from Mama Jo, the one from when we were girls?" I paused. Brenda shifted her weight behind me. "The one," I continued, speaking slowly and clearly, "that needed 2 cups of sugar and a whole lot of courage to get it right. I think I'm ready to try baking it again." There was a silence on the other end of the line. For a terrible second, I thought she hadn't understood. That the code we'd invented 50 years ago, a silly girl's game for when we were in trouble with our parents, was forgotten. Pecan pie meant trouble. A whole lot of courage meant big trouble. Then, Evelyn's voice came back, as smooth and calm as ever. "Why, Hattie, I was just thinking about that pie myself," she said. "I'll bring the ingredients over on Thursday night. There's a storm coming, the weather forecast said. Perfect weather for baking." My whole body flooded with relief. It was so powerful I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from swaying. "Thursday. A storm." She understood. "That sounds wonderful. Evelyn," I managed to say, "I'll be waiting." Brenda took the phone as soon as I hung up, her face showing nothing but mild annoyance at my sentimental chatter. She didn't have a clue. Thursday came. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray by late afternoon. The wind began to whisper through the trees. Then it started to howl. Junior and Brenda were upstairs in their home office. They hated storm. I had my canvas bag ready. It was tucked under my bed, holding only 3 things: a change of clothes, my husband Samuel's worn Bible, and the heavy, cloth-bound ledger. That ledger was my ticket. It was my voice, at 8 o'clock, just as the first fat drops of rain began to slap against the little basement window. I put my plan into action. I went into my small extra-levelity private bathroom. I took a deep breath, and then I let out a sharp cry and knocked the plastic trash can against the tile floor with a loud clatter. "Oh, my hip," I cried out, letting my voice tremble with pain. "Help." I heard their footsteps pounding on the floor above me. A moment later, Junior was at the bathroom door. "Mom, what is it? Are you all right?" "I think I slipped," I moaned, leaning heavily against the wall. "My hip, oh, Lord, it hurts." Brenda appeared behind him, her face a mask of irritation. "For heaven's sake, Hattie, be careful." It was the distraction I needed. While they were both crowded in the small doorway, fussing and trying to decide what to do, I knew this was my only chance. "Junior, maybe just a glass of water," I said, sinking down onto the closed toilet seat. "And an aspirin." It worked. He turned and hurried back up the stairs to the kitchen. Brenda hesitated, looking at me with suspicion, but the role of a concerned daughter-in-law forced her to follow him. The moment they were gone, I moved. The pain in my knee was real, a sharp, grinding agony with every step, but adrenaline was a powerful medicine. I grabbed my canvas bag from under the bed. I didn't go up the main stairs. I went to the door I had checked every night for a month. The door that led to the garage. It was always unlocked. An oversight. Their one mistake, the garage was dark and smelled of gasoline and fertilizer. The wind was shrieking outside now, rattling the big garage door. I didn't dare try to open that one. I crept along the side of Junior's enormous car to the small side door, the one that led to the yard. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. It opened. The wind and rain hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I pulled my thin sweater tight and limped out into the roaring darkness, down the long, paved driveway, towards the street. Every step was a prayer. Please, Lord, let her be there. And she was, parked just past their manicured lawn. Half hidden in the shadows of a neighbor's oak tree was Evelyn's old, familiar Buick. The headlights were off. She was just a dark shape in the storm. I pulled open the passenger door and tumbled inside, dragging my bag in after me. I slammed the door shut, and the sound of the storm was suddenly muffled. Inside the car, it was warm and quiet. It smelled like Evelyn's perfume and old peppermints. She didn't say a word. She just put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, her headlights still off until we were a block away. I slumped down in the seat, my body shaking from cold and exertion, and a fear so deep it felt like it was in my bones. I was breathing in ragged gasps. I looked back, just once. Through the sheeting rain, I could see the big brick house. Lights were on in all the windows. They were looking for me. My hand was still clutching the strap of my canvas bag. I could feel the hard, rectangular shape of the ledger pressed against my side. I was out. I was free. And I had my weapon with me. The lawyer and the ledger's weight. Evelyn's guest room was small, but it was filled with sunlight. For the first 2 days, I did little more than sleep. It was a deep, heavy sleep. The kind that comes after a long fever has finally broken. Evelyn would bring me tea and toast, never asking too many questions, her presence a warm, silent blanket of safety. She had seen the look in my eyes the night I stumbled out of her car, and that was enough for her. She knew. On the third morning, she sat on the edge of my bed. "Hattie," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "My nephew, David. He's a lawyer, not one of those fancy downtown types. He works for legal aid, helps folks who don't have a big voice. He's a good boy. He's coming by after lunch." A lawyer. The word felt foreign, heavy. Part of me just wanted to stay in that sun-filled room forever, to pretend the last 6 months had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had drawn a map in the dark, knew that this was the next step on the path. You don't run from a storm just to stand in the rain. You run to find solid ground. David arrived at 2 o'clock. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes but a weary set to his shoulders, the look of a man who'd seen too many sad stories. He carried a worn leather briefcase and smelled faintly of coffee and paper. We sat at Evelyn's small kitchen table. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. David took out a yellow legal pad and a pen. His manner was professional, polite, but distant. I could feel his gentle skepticism. I was another elderly woman with a family problem, another tangled story that would likely end in a heartache with no legal remedy. He asked me questions in a calm, methodical voice. My name, my age, my son's name, the address in Atlanta. He asked about the house in Georgia, about the papers I had signed. I answered each question simply, my voice even. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I just stated the facts as plainly as I could. He listened, nodding, making careful notes on his yellow pad. But I could see it in his eyes. He was seeing a confused, emotional old woman. He was seeing a he said, she said situation. A family dispute. A tragedy, perhaps, but not a crime. When he paused, looking down at his notes, I reached into the canvas bag at my feet. I pulled out Samuel's old ledger. The leather cover was worn smooth at the edges. It made a soft, solid sound as I placed it on the table between us. David looked at the ledger, then back at me, a question in his eyes. "Young man," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I was a nurse for 40 years. I worked in the cardiac ward at St. Francis. For 40 years, I know the importance of charting. Every pill, every temperature, every word a doctor says. You write it all down, because a person's life can depend on getting the details right." I pushed the ledger a little closer to him. This is my chart." He opened it. His lawyer's eyes, trained to scan documents for fact, moved over the first page. I watched his face. At first, there was just professional curiosity. He turned the page. I saw a flicker of something else. He read my entry about the Grandma Hattie's daily contribution schedule. He turned another page. He read about the Tylenol in the locked door. He slowed down. He was no longer scanning. He was reading. Every word. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on Evelyn's wall and the soft rustle of the turning pages. I just sat there, my hands folded, and let the book do the talking. I let 6 months of carefully recorded humiliations speak for themselves. The dates, the times, the exact quotes, the columns that noted Junior's constant, unwavering silence. I watched the weariness in David's shoulders straighten into a rigid posture. The professional distance in his eyes melted away, replaced first by disbelief, then by a slow-burning anger. It was the look of a good man confronted with a profound injustice. He finally looked up from the ledger, and he wasn't looking at a confused old woman anymore. He was looking at a witness. He was looking at a survivor. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, and his voice was different now. It was low, and it was serious. "This isn't just a diary. This is evidence. Damning evidence." He closed the book gently, as if it were a sacred text. He looked at me, his eyes holding mine. The property transfer, the lack of independent counsel, the subsequent treatment. This is a textbook case of elder abuse and undue influence. He took a deep breath. "They didn't just take advantage of you. They broke the law." For the first time in 6 months, I felt a tremor of something that wasn't fear or sadness. It was hope. But it was a different kind of hope. It wasn't the soft, wishing kind. It was a hard, sharp, steely kind of hope. The kind that feels like a weapon being placed in your hand. David opened his briefcase. He took out a fresh set of papers. They were not for taking notes. They were official forms. "Hattie," he said, and he called me by my first name. "Now, I will take your case. We will fight this. We will get your home back." And, just like that, I was no longer a runaway. I was a plaintiff. The phone calls and the cracks in the walls. A week after my meeting with David, the storm truly broke. Not a storm of rain and wind this time, but one of word. David had sent the official letters. The legal papers, with their serious, heavy-faced font, arrived at the big brick house in Atlanta. And the phone calls began. David had given me a simple little burner phone, the kind you buy at a drugstore. "They'll try to contact you. Hattie," he had said. "Don't answer. Don't engage. Let everything go to voicemail. We'll listen to them together." So that's what we did. Evelyn's spare room, with its cozy quilt and smell of lavender, became my war room. The little phone would buzz on the nightstand, and I would let it buzz. I'd watch the screen light up with my son's name, then his wife's name, over and over. Each buzz was a frantic knock on a door I had no intention of opening. Later, Evelyn would make us tea, and I would sit with David and press the little button to listen to the messages. It was like listening to a play, a very sad, very ugly play. The first messages were from Brenda. Her voice was high and sharp, like shattered glass. The first one was all disbelief. "Hattie, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to stop this right now. You are embarrassing this family. Call us back immediately." The second one was pure anger. "How dare you? After we opened our home to you, we gave you everything. Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're trying to ruin your own son, you ungrateful old woman." I just sat there, listening. I felt nothing. Her words were like stones thrown at a brick wall. They just clattered and fell to the ground. She didn't know me. She had never taken the time to know me. How could her words possibly hurt me? Then came the messages from Junior. They were different. They were worse. His first message was smooth. So smooth. It was the same voice he had used on my porch swing. The voice of the loving son. Mom, it's me. Listen, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Some lawyer sent us these crazy papers. Just come home. Mom, we can talk this out. I'm your son. We're family. I didn't answer. The next day, another message. This one was less smooth. The edges were starting to fray. Mom, please, pick up the phone. You don't understand what you're doing. This is serious. She's very upset. You're tearing this family apart. He was blaming me. Of course he was. It was easier than blaming himself. By the third day, the desperation began to seep through. The mask was cracking. His voice was strained, the words coming out too fast. And it was in this message that I heard the truth. Not the truth he wanted to tell me, but the real truth. The ugly, frightened truth. Mom, you have to stop this. His voice was almost a plea. You don't understand what's at stake here. Everything could fall apart. The business, it's not what you think. I needed that capital. I really needed it. And then, I heard it. In the background of his message, faint but clear, I heard Brenda's voice, shouting, "Tell her. Samuel, tell her you'll lose everything. Tell her it's her fault." I closed my eyes. It wasn't just him anymore. It was the two of them. A two-headed serpent, turning on itself. He wasn't the strong, successful businessman showing his mother mercy. He was a scared little boy who had made a bad bet, and he had used my home, my life, as his wager. He wasn't a villain. He was just weak. And his weakness had made him cruel. I felt a strange and terrible pity for him then. Not forgiveness. No, not that. But a deep, hollow sadness. The kind you feel when you see a beautiful old tree that has rotted from the inside out. From the outside, it still looks strong. But you know that one good storm will bring it crashing down. I pressed the button to delete the messages. David looked at me, his young face full of concern. "Are you all right?" "Hattie," I nodded slowly. "I am," I said, and my voice was steady. "I'm just listening to the cracks in the walls." He didn't understand, but I did. They were not a fortress. They were a house of cards, and a strong wind was starting to blow. Listening to those messages, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was watching the slow collapse of a soul I had brought into this world. If you are still listening, if you are still here with me on this journey, would you do an old woman a favor, please? Type the words "I am with you," Hattie, in the comments below, just so I know I'm not walking this final path alone. Your presence is the greatest strength I have to tell the final part of this story. The mediation and the mask. The mediation room was beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige chairs. It was a room designed to have no personality, a place where emotions were supposed to be neutralized. But the air in that room was thick and heavy, charged with all the things that had been left unsaid between a mother and her son. This was the first time I had seen Junior and Brenda in person since the night of the storm. They sat on the opposite side of a long, polished table. Junior wore a dark, expensive suit, but it seemed too big for him now. His face was pale and puffy. Brenda sat ramrod straight beside him, a mask of offended dignity perfectly in place. She looked at me once, a quick, venomous glance, then fixed her gaze on a point on the far wall. David sat beside me, calm and solid. My old ledger rested on the table in front of us. It was closed, but its presence was like a third person on our side of the table. A silent, unshakable witness, their lawyer, a man with silver hair and a voice as smooth as bourbon, started things off. He spoke of the unfortunate misunderstandings that can happen in a multi-generational home. He used words like communication breakdown and differing expectations. He painted a picture of a loving son and daughter-in-law who had done their best to care for an elderly mother who was perhaps a bit confused, a bit sensitive, prone to exaggeration. I did not flinch. I just listened, my hands resting on top of my closed ledger. Then came the offer. The lawyer leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, benevolent tone. To show their goodwill, he said, and to put this painful family matter to rest, my clients are prepared to offer Mrs. Thompson a generous monthly stipend, enough to live comfortably. All they ask is that this lawsuit be dropped, and the arrangement regarding the Georgia property remain as is. A stipend. They were offering me an allowance, a payment to go away quietly. To sell my silence. David began to formulate a legal response, but I gently placed a hand on his arm. I didn't look at their lawyer. I didn't look at the mediator, a tired-looking woman at the head of the table. I looked at my son. For the first time, I forced him to meet my gaze. His eyes flickered, trying to look away, but I held him there. Junior, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the beige stillness of the room. What was the name of the doctor I asked to see in November? He stared at me. Blankly. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. He blinked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at his lawyer, at Brenda, anywhere but at me. The silence stretched. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to cry. I just waited. I don't recall the specific name. Mom? He finally stammered. It was a busy time. I placed my hand on the ledger, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The memory was burned into me. You don't remember, I said, my voice flat, stating a fact, because you never asked. You just said you were busy. His face, which had been pale, began to flush a deep, blotchy red. Then, I turned my head and looked at Brenda. The mask of dignity was still there, but I could see the cracks forming around her eyes. Brenda, I said, my voice just as quiet, just as calm. You told me the silk blouse I stained cost $180. You were very precise about the cost. I paused, letting the memory settle in the room, but you never once asked if the bleach had burned my skin. Her mask shattered. A flicker of something shock, maybe even shame, crossed her face before it was replaced by pure, cold fury. She started to speak, but her lawyer shot her a look that silenced her. The game was over. The performance had failed. Their story of a confused, the sensitive old woman had just been dismantled, not by legal arguments, but by two simple, undeniable truths. They had not seen my pain. They had only seen my cost. The mediator cleared her throat. It seems we are at an impasse, she said. Stating the obvious, the rest was a formality. Their lawyer gathered his papers with brisk, angry movements. Brenda stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. She wouldn't look at me. Junior, however, stayed seated for a moment longer. He looked empty, as if the strings that held him up had been cut. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy he used to be, lost and afraid. But it was gone as quickly as it came. They left the room without another word. David and I remained seated. He let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding for the entire hour. Well, he said quietly, that's that. I nodded. I had won nothing in that room. No money, no property, but I had taken something back that was far more valuable. I had taken back my truth. And watching them walk away, their masks in pieces on the beige floor, I knew it was a victory more profound than any judge's ruling. They had walked in as my keepers. They walked out as what they truly were. Strangers. The courtroom and the echoes. The courtroom was not like the ones on television. There was no gleaming marble, no dramatic lighting. It was just a room. A large, quiet room with pale green walls, the color of a hospital waiting room. It smelled of old paper and floor wax, and a faint, electric hum from the fluorescent lights overhead. But it felt heavy. The air itself felt heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken truths and pending judgments. I sat beside David at a long wooden table. I wore my best church dress, a simple navy blue one. and the small pearl earrings Samuel had given me for our 40th anniversary. Evelyn sat right behind me, her hand resting on the back of my chair. A small, warm pressure that told me I was not alone. Across the aisle, I saw my son. Junior sat next to a man in a pinstripe suit, his lawyer. Junior looked thinner. The confidence he always wore like a well-tailored coat was gone. He just looked tired, defeated. He would not look at me. Brenda sat behind him, her face pale and pinched, clutching a designer handbag in her lap like a life raft. The judge was a woman with kind eyes and hair the color of steel. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She just watched, listened. David stood up and began to speak. His voice was calm and clear, and it filled the quiet room. He told the story. My story. He told it with facts, with dates, with legal terms. He spoke of undue influence, of breach of fiduciary duty, of elder abuse. And then, he picked up the ledger. My ledger. Samuel's book of memories, Your Honor, he said, holding it up. We have the documentation. Junior's lawyer stood up. He was a slick, smooth man. He tried to dismiss it. Objection, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. This is nothing more than the personal, subjective diary of an elderly woman. It's hearsay. It's irrelevant. The judge looked at David. David didn't even look at the other lawyer. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with a quiet passion. It's only subjective until you see the pattern. And the pattern is here, on every single page. A pattern of neglect, of manipulation, and of financial abuse. Documented with the precision of a nurse who spent her life caring for others, and in the end, had to use those same skills to care for herself. The judge looked at the ledger for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Objection overruled, she said softly. Proceed, Mr. Covington. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand. The wood felt solid under my hand. I sat down and looked out at the room. I didn't look at my son. I looked at the American flag standing in the corner. I thought of my Samuel, who fought for that flag, who believed in the promises it made. David's questions were simple. He asked me to confirm my name, my age. He asked me to identify the ledger. He asked me to read a few entries. I picked a page at random. My voice did not tremble. It was just a voice. My voice. November 1st. I read 10:30 a.m. Requested to see Dr. Miller about my knee. Brenda said she had a Zoom call. Junior said he was too busy. I read another. November 18th. 8:00 p.m. Served leftover pot roast. Junior commented that the grocery bill was getting out of hand. I did not add any emotion. I did not need to. The words themselves were enough. They were small, hard facts, each one a stone. And together, they built a wall. When it was the other lawyer's turn, he tried to confuse me. He asked me about dates, about times, trying to catch me in a contradiction. He suggested that my memory wasn't reliable. He suggested I was lonely and looking for attention. I just answered his questions. Yes. No. I don't recall that. It's in the ledger. My ledger was my memory. My ledger was my truth. It could not be twisted. It could not be confused. Finally, it was over. I stepped down from the stand and walked back to my seat. The room was silent. The judge took a long time. She read through her notes. She looked at the documents David had submitted. She looked at my ledger, which sat on her bench like a Bible. Then, she looked up. She looked directly at Junior. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice quiet but carrying the full weight of the law. This court finds that the agreement signed on September 12th was executed under conditions of undue influence and constitutes a gross breach of trust. I heard Brenda let out a small, sharp gasp. Therefore, the judge continued, the mortgage lien against the property of Mrs. Hattie Mae Thompson is hereby declared null and void. Full, unencumbered title is restored to her, effective immediately. A wave of something washed over me. It wasn't joy. It was just Air. I felt like I could finally take a full, deep breath, but the judge wasn't finished. She adjusted her glasses. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to refer this case to the district attorney's office for investigation into financial elder abuse under the state penal code. The room was utterly still. I watched my son. I watched as the color drained from his face. He seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He finally looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw no remorse. I saw no apology. I saw no sadness for what he had done to his mother. All I saw was the blank, a hollow terror of a man who had been caught. The collapse of a house of cards. I held his gaze for a moment. Then, I turned away. There was nothing left to see. The garden and the gospel songs. The first thing I did when I came home was walk through my garden. The roses had grown wild, their thorny arms reaching out in all directions. But they were still blooming. The air smelled of damp Georgia earth and sweet gardenias, a perfume no fancy candle in Atlanta could ever replicate. I touched a velvety petal, its edges browned from the heat. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And it was mine. The house was musty from being closed up, but it was a familiar smell. The smell of old wood, dried herbs, and a lifetime of memories. I opened the windows, letting the afternoon sun and a gentle breeze chase the staleness away. I ran my hand along the scarred surface of my kitchen table, the place where Samuel and I had shared thousands of meals, where Junior had done his homework as a little boy. The memories were still here. They hadn't been foreclosed on. Samuel's old ledger is tucked away now, in the bottom of my cedar chest, wrapped in an old linen cloth. Its job is done. I don't need it anymore. The story it told is now a part of me, not as an open wound, but as a healed-over scar. The kind that reminds you not of the pain, but of the fact that you survived it. Some afternoons, Evelyn comes over. We sit on the porch swing, the old chains groaning their familiar song. We don't talk much about what happened. We don't need to. She just brings 2 tall glasses of sweet iced tea, and we sit together, watching the sun dip below the pine trees at the edge of my property. The silence between us isn't empty. It's full of understanding, of shared history, of the quiet comfort of a friendship that has weathered every season. I am not the same woman who sat on this swing a year ago. That woman was a mother, a widow, a caregiver. She saw her value in what she could do for others. But this journey, through the cold silence of my son's kitchen and the beige stillness of that mediation room, it taught me something. It taught me about myself. I learned that a mother's love should be a sanctuary, not a sacrifice. You give your children roots to grow, and you give them wings to fly. But you must never, ever give them the ground beneath your own feet. Your life, your home, your dignity, that is yours to keep. It is the one inheritance you must never sign away. And for the children, perhaps the lesson is simpler. A parent is not a bank account to be withdrawn from, nor an old appliance to be stored in the basement when it is no longer convenient. They are the living history of who you are. Their hands are the ones that held you when you were small. Their stories are the first chapters of your own. To dishonor them is to cut away your own past, and to lose your way to the future. I pray one day my son understands that. I don't pray for it with anger, just with a deep, quiet sadness. And this world, this fast, loud world that values things over people, it will always try to tell you that your worth is in what you own, or what you can produce. It will measure you by the size of your house or the title on your business card. But I am 75. I own a small house with a leaky faucet and a garden of unruly memories. And I have learned that true wealth is not in a title deed, but in a spine made of steel. It's in a heart that knows its own truth, even when the world tries to tell you you're confused. And it's in a voice that, even when it trembles, refuses to be silenced. Sometimes, in the late afternoon when the light turns golden, I sit out here by myself. I close my eyes and I hum. Just old gospel songs. The ones my own mother used to sing while she was shelling peas on her porch. Songs about amazing grace and troubled waters. and finding your way home. My voice isn't strong like it used to be. It's a little shaky, a little thin, but it's my own, and as I hum, the melody drifts out over the garden, carried on the breeze, weaving through the roses and the pine. It is the sound of a woman who is finally, peacefully, at home, in her own house, and in her own skin. And that is where Hattie Mae Thompson's story ends. For now. What do you think of the choice she made? Would you have done anything differently if you were in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly read every single one. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think, please don't forget to leave a like. Share it with someone you believe it will touch. And subscribe to Dipcator Stories so you never miss the journeys that lie ahead. I'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, it might be your turn to tell the truth.